Case 1, Michelle Kehoe. By October 26, 2008, life in Buchanan County, Iowa, had settled into the quiet rhythm of late harvest season. The cornfields surrounding the small town of Littleton had already been cleared, leaving wide open land under a pale, thin autumn sky. It was in this setting that a case unfolded, one that would later become a critical reference point in Iowa criminal law, child protection policy, and the study of forensic psychology. Michelle Kehoe was, by all outward appearances, a typical mother of two fears. On that Sunday afternoon, she set out in the family's van with her sons, 7-year-old Sean and 2-year-old Seth. She told them they were going on a surprise outing, a special trip to mark the weekend. There was nothing inherently unusual about the plan. In rural Iowa, parents often take advantage of these quiet, golden weekends to visit local parks, fishing ponds, or the vast stretches of open land that define the state. To anyone who saw them at the start of their journey, Michelle appeared calm, organized, and in total control. What was not visible to the community was that the trip had been meticulously planned well in advance. Court records later revealed that Michelle had scouted a remote pond near Littleton days earlier. This wasn't a random stop. She had specifically chosen the location for its isolation and the limited foot traffic it received, even on a weekend. Investigators would later describe her preparation as deliberate and highly structured, key factors that would eventually become the prosecution's trial. That afternoon, Michelle stopped at a local convenience store around 12:30 p.m. and asked the clerk for directions to a nearby park. Surveillance footage and witness statements confirmed this interaction. At the time, it appeared perfectly ordinary, a mom looking for a place for her boys to play. However, investigators later determined that the request was entirely unnecessary. Michelle already knew exactly where she was going. The stop served a much darker purpose: to reinforce the appearance of a routine family outing and create a timeline of normalcy. After a brief visit to a playground, Michelle made another. She intentionally left her cell phone behind. Prosecutors later argued this act was designed to sever her connection to the outside world, preventing anyone from reaching them and, more importantly, delaying any immediate response once the tragic event began. This detail, while small, would become one of the strongest indicators of premeditation presented to the jury. At the pond, the facade finally collapsed. Michelle removed the children from the vehicle. According to court findings, she used materials she had prepared earlier to see or call out. Investigators avoided sensational language when describing the mechanics of what followed, but the medical testimony was undeniable. 2-year-old Seth did not survive the encounter. Sean, however, sustained injuries that were later classified by medical experts as life-threatening. Despite the severity of his condition, Sean remained conscious long enough to act. In an act of extraordinary resilience, he managed to make his way back to the family van and secure himself inside, locking the doors against the world. He remained there, hidden and silent, for hours until first responders arrived. His actions would later be described by emergency personnel as nothing short of miraculous, especially given his age, the power he had just endured. Michelle was later found nearby with injuries that were determined to be self-inflicted. She survived the night and regained consciousness the following morning. Instead of immediately seeking help for her children, she approached a farmhouse roughly half a mile away. When the homeowner answered the door, Michelle did not disclose the truth of what had occurred. Instead, she spun a web of deception, reporting that an unknown man had hijacked her vehicle earlier that day and caused harm to her and her children. She was so committed to the lie that she provided investigators with a detailed description of this alleged attacker, including his height, his clothing, and even a specific scent. She also produced a written account portraying herself as a protective parent who had tried to save her children during the incident. Prosecutors would later argue that the incredible specificity of this false narrative demonstrated a spoken to redirect blame and escape accountability. That account unraveled almost instantly. When emergency crews reached the pond, they found Sean alive inside the locked van. As he was being prepared for transport, the 7-year-old didn't mention a mysterious stranger. He told the paramedics clearly, consistently, and without prompting, his mother had taken him into the wooded area and caused his injuries. The investigation that followed became a textbook example of controlled forensic interviewing. While Michelle was hospitalized at the University of Iowa hospitals, Special Agent Chris Calloway conducted a series of interviews designed to reduce her defensiveness. Instead of making direct accusations, he spoke in hypotheticals, referencing unrelated scenarios involving parental mistakes. This psychological approach allowed Michelle to speak without feeling immediately cornered. She eventually admitted responsibility, even acknowledging that she had targeted Sean first because she believed his age made him more likely to interfere with her plan. Extroverted that she suffered from severe major depressive disorder and the time of the incident. The defense argued that in her rational state, she believed she was saving her children from future suffering and could not fully understand the moral or legal consequences of her actions. The prosecution countered with the overwhelming evidence of preparation, concealment, and the elaborate deception following the event. They argued that her actions, the scouting of the pond, the discarding of the phone, and the fabrication of the attacker, showed a clear understanding of wrongdoing. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Michelle Kehoe was found guilty of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and child endangerment. In December 2009, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case remains one of Iowa's most cited examples in discussions of criminal responsibility and the limits of the insanity defense, standing as a pleaching testament to the fracture of the maternal bond. In the American Midwest, there is a phrase people use to describe the local culture: Iowa nice. It represents more than just politeness. It represents a deep-seated trust, a sense of stability, and a cultural belief that families are the safest, most sacred place a child can be. In these communities, the relationship between parent and child is not just personal, it is the very foundation of society. But criminal history shows us a darker reality. It shows that when that bond collapses, the consequences ripple far beyond a single household, tearing through the fabric of the entire state. Welcome to Cold Read Crimes. Today's investigation examines 10 cases from the state of Iowa that challenged every long-standing assumption about family, responsibility, and the systems we trust to keep us safe. These cases did more than just shock their communities. They forced the courts, mental health professionals, and lawmakers to confront uncomfortable questions about warning signs that were ignored and the systemic failures that allowed prolonged risk to remain hidden in plain sight. These are not stories told for shock value. They are case studies, painstakingly examined through court records, appellate rulings, and verified reporting that reveal how the maternal shadow can fall over even the most normal Midwestern neighborhoods. Each case exposes a different fracture point: missed interventions, misread behaviors, or institutional oversight stretched beyond its limits. Before we continue with this deep dive, I want to check in with our community. Where are you watching from today? What time is it there? And what's the weather like outside your window? We reach investigators all over the globe, and those small details remind us that these conversations matter far beyond the borders of Iowa. If you're new here, Cold Read Crimes focuses on in-depth narrative-driven analysis that prioritizes accuracy and restraint. If that approach to true crime matters to you, please take a moment to like this video right now. It helps the algorithm share these important examinations with a wider audience. And if you want to stay with us as we unseal the rest of these files, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Now we move to our next file, one that began behind the quiet, clean exterior of a West Des Moines home and ended with statewide scrutiny of how our warning signs are identified, ignored, or Case 2, Nicole Marie Finn in West Des Moines. Neighborhoods like the one on 88th Street are designed to project absolute stability. Carefully maintained lawns, uniform siding, and quiet, safe streets create an impression of order. These are the kinds of neighborhoods associated with the best schools and attentive neighbors. When emergency responders entered the home of Nicole Marie Finn, they immediately understood that something was deeply wrong. The residents showed signs of prolonged neglect, and responders were directed upstairs to a bedroom that had been deliberately and heavily altered to restrict access and movement. Inside that room was 16-year-old Natalie Finn. The space was unfurnished and stark. The original carpet had been removed and replaced with linoleum. The windows were sealed shut with plywood, and the door was equipped with electronic alarms designed to alert an adult if it was opened. Investigators later confirmed that these measures were intentionally inside from leaving without permission. Natalie was unresponsive when responders found her. Medical personnel described her condition as critical and immediately life-threatening. She was transported to Blank Children's Hospital, but the damage to her body was too far gone. She did not survive. The medical examiner later concluded that Natalie had passed away as a result of prolonged deprivation and medical neglect. Hospital records showed a sign in her physical condition over time, which was inconsistent with any untreated illness. As investigators expanded their focus, they discovered that Natalie was not the only child affected. Her siblings, Jaden and Michaela, had also been confined to the same room under similar restrictions. Both were found to be significantly underweight and in poor health. The house had effectively been turned into a passive-controlled environment. Electronic alarms were attached to the bedroom door, windows were sealed, and access to basic necessities was strictly regulated. According to testimony later presented in court, the children were required to request permission for nearly every activity, including eating and using the bathroom. Nicole Finn presented a sharply different image to the outside world. She was known publicly as an animal rescue advocate who frequently took in stray cats and kittens. Her social media presence emphasized compassion and care for the vulnerable. But behind closed doors, investigators uncovered a pattern of contempt and dehumanization directed at her own children. Text messages recovered during the investigation showed repeated expressions of hostility. In several messages, Nicole described the children in dismissive and degrading terms, indicating a long-standing emotional detachment. Testimony from the surviving children described a rigid regime of control. Food was limited and monitored. Failure to comply with instructions, even when caused by weakness or illness, resulted in further brightness, and the children described living in constant fear of triggering the alarms. At one point, the situation became so desperate that the children attempted to signal for help from outside the house, but no effective intervention occurred. What elevated the Finn case beyond a single act of abuse was the institutional breakdown uncovered by the state. A state ombudsman report revealed that the Department of Human Services had received 14 separate child abuse reports concerning the Finn household between 2005 and 2016. In the final year of Natalie's life, staff at Walnut Creek Alternative High School made repeated reports describing severe weight loss and visible distress. Despite these further keys, be forced to screened out at intake and not investigated further. DHS accepted explanations that Natalie's condition was behavioral rather than medical without conducting a physical examination. After Natalie's death, Nicole Finn was charged with first-degree kidnapping. The kidnapping charges became a defining legal moment in Iowa. The defense argued the children could not be kidnapped in their own home, but the court ruled that present surveillance meets the legal definition regardless of location. In January 2018, Nicole Finn was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences. Natalie's father, Joseph Finn, who had assisted in modifying the room, later received a 30-year sentence. The House of Alarms remains a dark case study in the consequences of ignoring repeated warning signs hidden behind a suburban facade. Case 3, Misty Ray, in the town of Perry, Iowa. The house at 1708 First Street carried a reputation built on trust. For more than a decade, it operated as an in-home daycare called Rays of Sunshine. Parents dropped off their toddlers, believing they were leaving them in a nurturing environment. Neighbors viewed the home as a cornerstone of community support. At the center of it all was Misty Ray. Alongside her husband, Mark Ray, Misty presented herself as a foster and adoptive parent deeply committed to children in need. Over a 10-year period, the Rays fostered more than 20 children and adopted 3 girls from the foster care system. Between 2006 and 2017, the household received more than $640,000 in state funding intended for childcare and support. Behind that carefully maintained image, one of those children was being systematically isolated. Sabrina Ray was 16 years old when emergency responders were called to the residence on May 12th. 2017. She had spent much of her adolescence confined to a bedroom, separated from normal routines. Investigators determined that her condition had deteriorated over an extended period due to sustained deprivation. Medical findings concluded that Sabrina from long-term nutritional neglect. The investigation revealed that the living conditions bore no resemblance to the environment advertised to the public. While the Rays operated a licensed daycare during the day, Sabrina and her sisters were subjected to an entirely different set of rules. Access to food and movement was strictly controlled. Testimony described a household structured around compliance rather than care. In one tragic detail referenced during the investigation, a sibling was observed leaving the home in unsafe ways simply to obtain drinking water from a neighbor's garden hose. Perhaps the most revealing detail was the timing of the event. On the day Sabrina's condition became critical, Mark and Misty Ray were traveling out of state on a family vacation to Disney World with their adoptive sons. Sabrina and her sisters were left behind under the supervision of adult relatives. Evidence later showed that Sabrina had suffered an injury weeks earlier that restricted her mobility, yet no meaningful medical care was provided. That relative, her adoptive brother Justin Ray, was later convicted for his role in contributing to her condition. As investigators widened their scope, the case mirrored the patterns seen in other iron failures. An ombudsman report revealed that the DHS had received 11 separate child abuse reports concerning the Ray household between 2010 and 2015. Despite this volume of concerns, meaningful intervention never occurred. Several complaints were screened out at intake. In one instance, a daycare inspection failed to include a full examination of the home because of a bedroom where Sabrina spent her final days was never even inspected. In early 2019, Misty Ray entered a guilty plea to first-degree kidnapping and multiple counts of third-degree kidnapping to avoid a trial on homicide charges. She was sentenced to prison without the possibility of parole, plus additional consecutive time. The courtroom atmosphere during sentencing underscored the pauses at distorted family dynamics at play. As Misty was led away, a family member reportedly yelled words of encouragement, a reminder of how normalized the environment had become. The legal aftermath extended beyond prison sentences. In 2023, the state of Iowa reached a $10 million settlement with Sabrina's surviving siblings. The agreement mandated reforms, including improved training for investigators to recognize the signs of pre-state. Sabrina Ray's name is now a catalyst for legislative change, exposing how abuse can hide behind credentials, licenses, and a carefully curated public image. Case 4, Cheyenne Harris. On August 30, 2017, a call was placed to the Chickasaw County Sheriff's Office reporting the death of an infant. Zachary Cohen told dispatchers that his 4-month-old son, Sterling Daniel Cohen, had been fed earlier that morning and appeared healthy. According to the report, when the parents checked on him again a short time later, he was unresponsive. At first glance, it appeared to be that impression did not survive the arrival of first responders. When deputies and medical personnel entered the Hilltop Avenue apartment in Alta Vista, Iowa, they immediately noted conditions inconsistent with a medical emergency. The apartment showed signs of prolonged neglect, particularly in a rear bedroom that was physically separated from the rest of the living space. That room had limited airflow and elevated heat. Sterling was found alone in a battery-powered infant swing positioned against the wall. The device was still clicking back and forth when responders entered. Medical personnel quickly determined the child had been unattended for an extended period of time. The medical examiner's report concluded that Sterling's was not sudden or accidental. Investigators determined that the infant had experienced profar, resulting in a severe medical decline. His weight was far below what would be expected for his age, indicating long-term deprivation. The cause of death was ruled a complication stemming from untreated conditions that would have been parental care. As the investigation expanded, authorities uncovered a postic in how the household functioned. While Sterling remained confined to the back room, the couple's older toddler daughter was found healthy and properly fed. Friends and acquaintances later told investigators they were unaware the couple even had an infant son. One witness, Jordan Clark, testified that he had frequent contact with Zachary through work and social visits, yet had never heard Sterling mentioned. The child's existence had effectively been concealed from the world. Investigators also identified substance abuse as a central factor. Evidence showed that both Cheyenne Harris and Zachary Cohen were regularly using methamphetamine during the period Sterling was being neglected. Financial records demonstrated that money and attention were consistently directed toward maintaining that habit rather than providing infant care. Prosecutors argued that this was not a case of inexperience or a momentary lapse, but a case of deliberate indifference. During the trial in Lamars, Iowa, the state presented evidence that the infant's room shared a wall with the parents' bedroom. The jury heard testimony establishing that Sterling's needs would have been audible and apparent over an extended period. Prosecutors emphasized that the neglect required pieces of decisions to ignore clear signs of distress. Cheyenne Harris's defense team introduced testimony regarding that these factors impaired her ability to function as a caregiver. In February 2019, it took them only a few hours to find Cheyenne Harris guilty of first-degree murder and child endangerment. She received the mandatory sentence under Iowa law, life in prison without the possibility of parole. Case 5, Heidi Watkins. If you travel to the northwest corner of Iowa, you'll find Spirit Lake, a place known for its sprawling blue waters and its status as a premier vacation destination. But in the early days of January 2000, that peace was shattered. This is the story of 2-year-old Shelby Deuce, the face of legislative reform. Shelby was described by those who knew her as a friendly child who loved to play. But through the final months of '99, that light began to fade. Daycare workers at the Small World Center began to notice Shelby was becoming withdrawn, and physical marks were appearing on her body. With daycare workers did exactly what they were trained to do. They contacted the DHS multiple times to report significant bruising on Shelby's cheek, a black eye, and a swollen hand. Each time, Shelby's mother, Heidi Watkins, had an explanation. She told investigators that Shelby was simply clumsy and that the injuries happened because the toddler would run in circular paths and accidentally doorways. Tragically, these explanations were accepted. At one point, a DHS investigator even suggested that Heidi place a wooden panel across a doorway to block that path, treating the symptoms, while ignoring the fourth. 2000 emergency responders found 2-year-old Shelby had severe injuries to her head and multiple broken bones in her hands and ribs that had been inflicted in the weeks leading up to her. Heidi Watkins and her boyfriend, Jesse Wendelsdorf, were both charged with first-degree murder. Heidi claimed she had been asleep and was unaware of any harm. While a jury ultimately acquitted them of the top homicide count, Heidi was convicted of multiple acts of child endangerment and sentenced to 50 years in prison. Shelby's story triggered a massive state investigation that identified critical practice problems within the DHS. This led to the 2001 passage of Shelby's Law, which toughened penalties and allowed lawmakers to review confidential child abuse records to ensure accountability. Heidi Watkins was paroled in 2013. The legacy of this case remains a reminder of how the silence of a system can be just as fatal as the actions of the perpetrator. We are halfway through our investigation into the cases that changed the legal landscape of the Heartland forever. These first 5 stories have shown us that even behind the most normal facades, a harrowing reality can remain hidden for years. I want to pause and ask you, do you believe systemic failures, like the ones seen in the Natalie Finn and Shelby Deuce cases, are the result of overworked staff, or a deeper cultural problem with how we view parental premonitions? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If this deep dive is opening your eyes to the complexities of these investigations, please make sure you've hit that subscribe button. We have 5 more cases to cover, including a 32-year secret solved by modern science and a mother whose actions in a Waukee home left a community in disbelief. You won't want to miss the forensic breakthroughs coming up. Now we move to Ottawa, where a mother's changing story led to one of the most legal rulings in recent memory. Case 6, Kelsey Thomas. On July 19, 2018, a frantic 911 call brought police to a home in Ottawa. Inside, 5-year-old Chloe Chandler was found unresponsive. Her mother, 24-year-old Kelsey Thomas, was present and visibly distraught. She explained to investigators that Chloe had been playing in her bedroom closet and had tried to make a swing out of a pair of pajama pants. Kelsey claimed the child had accidentally become entangled and lost consciousness. To the community, it was a manner. Chloe had just graduated from preschool and was described as a little girl who loved her bike and everything purple. But as investigators examined the scene, inconsistencies began to emerge. Forensic investigator Michael Searin noted that the mechanics of the described swing didn't fully support the story. Even more concerning was Kelsey's behavior. Relatives reported she had not mentioned Chloe's condition until prompted, raising questions about the circumstances leading to the child's injury. During an investigation by the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation, Kelsey's account evolved. She ultimately admitted to actions that contributed to Chloe's death. The official cause of death was ruled as homicide due to ligature strangulation. The legal proceedings were complex. Kelsey Thomas was charged with first-degree murder, but her first trial in March 2000 and March 2020 ended in a hung jury. Facing a retrial, she requested a bench trial, allowing a judge to decide the outcome. In October 2020, District Court Judge Lucy Gimon presided. Evidence showed that Chloe's injury resulted from an interaction with the pajama pants, but there was intense debate over whether the act was premeditated or a sudden impulse. In November 2020, Judge Gimon ruled Kelsey Thomas not guilty of first- or second-degree murder, but convicted her of the lesser charge of involuntary manslaughter. The judge explained that while Kelsey's actions were horrific and seriously negligent, the state had failed to provide sufficient evidence of calculated intent. She was sentenced in January 2021. The case remains one of Iowa's most discussed, highlighting the challenge of placing intent in tragic circumstances and the importance of protecting children in everyday environments. Case 7, Yamissi Keto. In the Des Moines metro area, Waukee is known as one of Iowa's fastest-growing, family-oriented suburbs. On August 31, 2023, a 911 call brought officers to a home on Grand Pine Main Street. When they arrived, 33-year-old Yamissi Keto was met at the door, visibly distraught and struggling to speak. A strong chemical odor filled the house. Officers followed Keto upstairs to a bedroom where her 13-month-old son, DK, was found unresponsive. Despite intensive life-saving efforts by paramedics, the child could not be revived and was pronounced deceased at the scene. Keto herself was suffering from chemical exposure and was taken to a local hospital for treatment. Requiring several days of police PP and during questioning, Keto revealed a complex and tragic situation. She described a severe mental health crisis, including intense depression and feelings of hopelessness. Investigators learned that her actions were influenced by these conditions. She admitted to taking steps that put her son at risk and acknowledged the outcome, leading to charges of first-degree homicide and child endangerment. Keto confessed she did not want to leave him behind after she pressed it to end her own life. The trial became a focal point for discussions on mental health and parental responsibility. Keto's defense relied on expert testimony that she suffered from postpartum psychosis and major depressive disorder, arguing she believed she was acting in her child's best interest. The prosecution, however, presented evidence suggesting she understood her actions and their consequences, citing the event. In 2025, the Iowa Court of Appeals upheld Keto's conviction. She was sentenced to B5 prison without the possibility of parole. The case highlighted the intersection of severe mental health challenges and child safety, serving as a reminder of the importance of early intervention and community support for families in crisis. Case 8, Cindy Sue Elder. On a freezing Monday afternoon, December 21, 1992, workers at the Iowa City landfill were performing their usual tasks when something highly unusual appeared among the debris. Tucked in the trash was the body of a newborn, who became known as Baby John Doe. At the time, the baby's identity and parentage were unknown, and the case quickly became a haunting mystery that would remain unsolved for over 3 decades. The Iowa City Police Department launched a thorough investigation. Officers traced the garbage truck's route, interviewed residents, and reviewed medical records. But in the early 90s, the tools available to investigators made it impossible to identify the child. Baby John Doe was eventually laid to rest without a name, leaving the case dormant but never forgotten. In 2020, advancements in forensic science offered a new opportunity. Preserved tissue samples were sent to a specialized DNA laboratory in Texas, where forensic-grade genome sequencing enabled investigators to identify a familial connection. By February 2022, the evidence led them to Cindy Sue Elder, living a quiet life in Missouri. When questioned, Elder acknowledged that in '92 she had faced an unplanned pregnancy she felt unprepared for. She admitted to taking steps to keep her situation hidden from her family and community. She confessed to Christine intentionally harming herself during the pregnancy in a failed attempt to change her situation. She eventually gave birth in a basement and took steps to Misty in silence so no one would hear him. In September 2025, Cindy Sue Elder was formally charged. Police and prosecutors described the case as a dead mark moment for Iowa law enforcement, demonstrating the power of modern science to bring closure to long-standing mysteries. The story of baby John Doe served as a reminder of the value of persistence in protecting the most vulnerable members of the community. The story of Cindy Sue Elder and baby John Doe shows that time doesn't erase accountability, and advances in science can bring answers even decades later. It took 32 years, but the case finally reached a resolution. I want to hear from you. What do you think about the use of genetic genealogy to solve cold cases? Are there other long-standing mysteries in Iowa or across the country that you think could be solved with modern technology? Share your thoughts in the comments. We love seeing how our community pieces together evidence and theories. If this investigation has captured your attention, please share this video with friends or on social media. Every share helps highlight these stories and ensures the memory of those affected is honored. Next, we move to Case 9, a Fort Dodge hotel room. Case 9, Hillary Lee Tyler, Fort Dodge, Iowa, is a city known for its straightforward Midwestern values. But on September 20, 2011, the routine at the Super 8 Hotel was disrupted by an unexpected discovery. Room 225 was marked as checked, yet a Do Not Disturb sign still hung from the handle. When the housekeeper entered, she noticed items under broom. She found discarded vodka bottles and exactly $8 in cash on the dresser, which she initially thought was a tip. Then she noticed a garbage can that was part. The guest in room 225 was 23-year-old Hillary Lee Tyler. Earlier that year, her boyfriend had noticed changes in her health, but Hillary maintained she had a medical condition that explained her situation. She avoided discussing it further, maintaining her privacy even as they moved into a trailer together. On September 19th, Hillary experienced complications but did not seek medical attention. The next morning, she checked into the Super 8 alone. Later, she returned to the trailer without mentioning the event, going about her day as usual. When DCI officers interviewed Hillary, her story was inconsistent. Under questioning, she offered details that raised serious legal concerns. The state medical examiner conducted an autopsy and ruled the cause of death as drowning, which became the linchpin of the prosecution's case. Hillary was convicted of second degree. Her case eventually reached the Iowa Supreme Court, which issued a pivotal ruling on the limits of medical testimony. The court emphasized that medical examiners must report objective findings and cannot cross the line into assessing a defendant's. The decision, known as State B. Tyler, reshaped Iowa law enforcement procedures and forensic reporting standards. After the case was remanded, Hillary reached a plea deal in 2017, accepting a sentence that reflected her involvement while avoiding another trial. Room 225 remains a cautionary tale about secrecy, legal boundaries, and how complex personal situations can intersect with the justice system. Case 10, Jerica Richardson. While most of the cases we've examined ended in unthinkable loss, this final case is perhaps the victim survived. In 2009, Jerica Richardson was a 20-year-old mother living in a home that should have been a home's son, E.N. But for this infant, life became a series of challenges almost from the moment he was born. E.N. arrived on May 27, 2009. His entry into the world was for complicated. He spent his first days in the NICU. Even more concerning, he tested positive for at birth. This triggered an Medici-esque response from the DHS. A safety plan was put in place, and a nurse checked on the family twice a week. Under that plan, the father was never to be left alone with the infant. Despite these safeguards, Ian faced danger early on. Just 3 weeks after coming home, he was rushed to the hospital with a serious arm injury. While the circumstances were suspicious, the safety plan had been compromised and the threat in the home remained. The situation reached a critical point days later. Jerica handed the crying infant to the father while stepping outside for a cigarette. Within minutes, the crying stopped. When she returned, she found Ian and Diaz. He was rushed to Blank Children's Hospital, where doctors discovered he had suffered multiple serious injuries, including 15 rib fractures and permanent brain damage caused by a lack of oxygen. Medical staff determined these injuries were entirely inconsistent with the family's explanations. In 2010, Jerica Richardson reached a plea agreement. She pleaded guilty to multiple counts of child endangerment and neglect, admitting to leaving Ian alone with the father in and failing to seek medical care after noticing his injuries. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Ian Kinnear's survival is a 7 to resilience, but it came at a heavy price. Today he remains profoundly disabled, unable to move his legs or support his head independently. He requires constant medical care and lifelong support. It is the final, poignant example of what happens when the maternal shadow overshadows a child's safety. 10 cases, 10 mothers, 10 stories that have left a permanent impression on the history of Iowa. As we close these files, it's impossible not to notice the recurring patterns that appear across them. From the House of Alarms in West Des Moines to the sweltering back rooms of Alta Vista, we saw systems responsible for protecting the state's most vulnerable citizens. But we also saw change and progress. Because of the legacies of children like Shelby Dews and Natalie Finn, Iowa has taken significant steps to strengthen its child welfare system. The 2025 legislative reforms and ongoing updates are direct responses to these tragedies, proof that even the darkest chapters can inspire meaningful life-saving improvements. Before we go, I want to leave you with one final question. What's the weather like where you are right now? For sometimes, noticing the world outside is the best way to ground yourself after exploring stories this heavy. Thank you for joining us on this investigation with Cold Read Crimes. If these cases moved you, and you believe in the importance of shining a light on the truth, please make sure you've liked this video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on those notifications to be the first to know when our next file is unsealed. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next Cold Read.